I'd like to begin with reading a verse, and this is in John's Gospel, the 16th chapter, and I'm reading the last verse of John's Gospel, 16th chapter, verse 33. These things I have spoken to you, so that in me you will have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take courage, I have overcome the world. Jesus never promised us life without problems. In fact, there are about 6 things that God revealed to me about this verse. In this world you will have tribulation. Be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. He did not tell us that life is going to be a picnic. He did not tell us that if you accept me, you'll have no difficulties. There are about 6 things that I think is very wonderful thing to accept in life. First thing, life is difficult. Jesus simply said that. He said, in this world, you will have difficulties. Second thing, in this world, people will let you down. I always say, if you're not being let down by people, then you've not lived long perhaps. So first thing, difficulty. Life is difficult. In this world, you'll be let down. Third thing I want to say is this. Life is more tragic than orderly. Oswald Chambers said it so beautifully. He said, you will grow in your spiritual life and you will have a better understanding of reality if you accept the fact that life in this broken world is more tragic than orderly. It is not orderly. The fourth thing, I think, is this, that somewhere in life, you and I will have financial difficulties. Fifth thing, all of us will have sometime or the other family problems. And the sixth thing is this, that you and I sometime in our life, we will have health issues. Now these are realities that you cannot simply avoid. That is why in 1 Peter 4th chapter, in verse 12, Peter says, don't think something strange is happening to you when you fall into various trials. Because sickness, difficulties is part of the reality of living this world. But the good news for us is that God says, my son, my daughter, I will give you the grace, the power to go through it triumphantly. And that's why Jesus said, in this world you'll have tribulation, be of good cheer. And that being cheerful, that being courageous is something God empowers us. And so we praise God. And now we're going to hear a small testimony of how God sustained Betty during her sickness and how triumphantly God came to her and sustained her even in the midst of cancer.
Praise be to God Almighty. My name is Betty Roby. Almost 36 years I was in Bombay, born and brought up there. Moved to Bangalore in 2006. And I started working at the Bishop Cotton Girls' School in the year 2007. It was the same year that my mother passed away due to cancer. And I was always told that I need to do my regular checkup and I need to do my mammogram, my tests, because I was found to be a very suitable candidate for cancer. And I used to do all that until the year 2008 when I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And my whole world came crashing down. I thought of what my mother had gone through, and all those thoughts came to me as well. My children were very small. My younger one was just in the 2nd grade. My elder one was in the 6th grade. They were studying in the same school where I was teaching. And it was very difficult for me to accept the fact that despite all the things that I had done and all the regular checks that I had done, I had cancer. I think like all the people think, the notion is cancer is a verdict. It is a sentence that is given to people telling them that their life has come to an end. And I thought about it the same way. I immediately went to the doctor. By God's grace, I went to the right hospitals. I know God guided me in all those areas. And I had a lumpectomy followed by radiation. There were 33 sittings of radiation that I went through. I had 6 cycles of chemo, and I had a kind of cancer called as HER2, for which there was one particular injection that I had to take for an entire year, 17 vials of Herceptin. So that went on for a year. So right from 2008 until May of 2010, I was going through treatment for cancer. Now through all this, I did get closer to God because I wanted to be healed completely. I wanted to get back on my feet. I wanted to do all the things that I used to do before. I wanted to lead a normal life. And as much as whatever I was going through, I wanted to be there for my children. I used to cry and beg the Lord that He grant me life. So God did guide me, but through all that I know that God was a part of my life, but He was somewhere in the periphery of everything. And I was just asking Him for physical healing. I got a lot of support from family, from my extended family, from friends, and I spent a lot of time in God's presence, reading His Word. But God still was somewhere around and not as close as I would have really wished and wanted Him to be. So after 2010, I went for my regular check. But every time that I went, I always went with fear and apprehension. Anything that I had difficulty with, even a minor cold or a cough, and my thoughts would go back to, is it cancer? Is it coming back again? And there were a lot of people who had many queries that they asked me. Why did you have cancer? Is it something related to your past life? Is it because you have unforgiven sins in your life? Is it because of a generational curse that has come by? And as people would always have thoughts and opinions, they always had ways by which to handle these things. And I went with all that, listening to people and trying as much as possible to be strong, going back to God when I knew I needed Him the most. So for 5 years, almost 6 years I should say, I was cancer free, because the doctor told me that if you've crossed 5 years from the time you were diagnosed, you are truly cancer free, because I had never heard the doctor ever tell me that I would be 100% cured. He never told me that, but he told me that if you cross 5 years from the time you have been diagnosed, you are literally cancer free. So in 2014, in the month of October, I chanced upon a lump again in the same area where the lumpectomy was done. And I had all these doubts coming back to me. But I went for a wellness check, and I went through all the tests that were required, the mammogram, which eventually turned out to be benign. I went back to the doctor, and there were other symptoms that accompanied the lump, because of which I was finally asked to go to a surgical oncologist. And he immediately asked me to go through a biopsy. The day before the biopsy result was supposed to come, I was at home alone. There was no one at home. And I was praying to God at that point of time. And He guided me to the verse in Matthew, which refers to Jesus being at the Garden of Gethsemane. And just as Jesus prayed, Father, if it is possible, take this cup away from me, yet not as my will, but your will be done. And that is the kind of thought that God gave me at that point. And this heavy burden, this big burden was lifted from me. And there was this great peace that descended into my heart. My children were not aware. Nobody had known that I had gone in for a biopsy again. It was only my husband and I. And when we went to the hospital the next day, and even as the results were given, my husband was not even allowing me to read the report. And as he was skimming through those 2 or 3 pages of the report, I saw what was written at the end of the report. It was recurrence. The cancer had come back again. Despite all the assurances by the doctor, despite what the doctor had said that I've crossed that benchmark of 5 years, I am safe, the cancer had come back. And I had no emotions of sadness, of fear. There was this peace that was just there within me, and I could see my husband breaking down and crying as he held on to the report. We contemplated not telling our children, but on the way back I said, no, we need to tell them. We need to tell everyone. And I was so strong, and I don't know where that strength had come in. I was just ready for anything and everything. And even as I started with the treatment again, I had to go through chemo the second time. I had the same type of cancer again. It was HER2. So again those 17 injections, but this time I didn't have radiation. And I was to go in for surgery again. So I was to start with chemo first. And how beautifully the Lord stepped in. Because I know that when I told Him, Lord, not my will, as your will be done, what I had done was I had allowed God to permit whatever He was going to allow into my life, with no promises of everything going to be smooth sailing. The only thing that sustained me was the assurance that God is going to take care of me. I understood what it meant to think in my heart and to think in my mind that this is allowed by God. So when God allows it, He takes care of everything. And what a beautiful thought that was. I understood what it meant. Why that peace? When all around me, everyone was going through a state of shock and mixed feelings, and there was sadness. And here I was ready to go in for the battle. The journey was just beginning. And I knew that God was in control completely. I think the others didn't understand what I was feeling. And as much as I prayed, Lord, give them the feeling and understanding as much as I feel, what it means to go through this journey without having to be troubled. And that's what God gave me. He gave me 4 beautiful gifts. The gift of peace, the gift of joy, the gift of His grace, and the gift of comfort. And these 4 gifts were more than enough for me to start my journey. Not that there wasn't going to be any hardship. Chemo always comes with its share of difficulties. I had hair loss again, the second time, and there were other sort of problems. I was unable to eat, there was nausea, there was pain in my joints, my hands. I had no sensation in my feet because of one of the medicines that I was taking. So all that happened, everything. But in the midst of all that, through all that, and because my focus was not on my circumstances, because I had fixed my focus on the Lord, because I freely accepted the 4 gifts that He gave me, I went through a period of absolute peace and joy. And what an amazing journey it was. What a blessing it was, because that was a time when God, who during the first time was in the periphery, was waiting outside, I allowed my Lord to move right into the center of my world, right into the center of my situation, into the center of my circumstances. And I could go through cancer the second time because of these things that He provided. His provisions were immense. I remember the first time the doctor telling me, avoid contact with people, do not step out, do not have contact with people so as to keep away infections. But this time the journey was very different. There were people coming in, there were prayers all the time, and there were so many people that I went out and met, even people who were going through cancer, just like me. I had so many friends in the hospital when I used to go for my chemo every day. I used to go every week for 4 months, every Saturday for 4 months. And invariably there would be somebody or the other with whom I was sharing what the Lord has done. I remember people coming and asking me, how is it that I could manage, or how is it that I could go through this? And all the time I would say, it is God who is doing this. And how well He takes care of us when we trust Him completely. No complaints, no grumbling. This time again people asked me, weren't you healed the first time? And how is it that you're having cancer again? And I told them, this is what the Lord has allowed. The right of healing, the prerogative is with Him. As He deems fit, the healing or not is absolutely with Him. But they didn't understand what I was telling them, because this time I was not asking God to heal me physically. What He had touched was my heart. He touched my inside. He was giving me a spiritual healing and not a physical healing. And that is what God has given. His grace, as we read in 2 Corinthians, His grace is sufficient. He gave me comfort. Again in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, it says, just as God has been a comfort unto you, you need to be a comfort unto others for all those who are going through trouble. His joy is new every day. I held on to that joy. And what peace. As Jesus has said in John chapter 14 verse 27. Peace I give you, my peace I leave with you, and not as the world gives. And do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. I held on to these gifts, and this is what the Lord has done. He gave me new life in Him. He gave me hope that I could trust Him, not depending on my situations and circumstances. I could find joy devoid of all these things because my eyes are fixed only on the Lord. And it doesn't matter what the situation be. It doesn't matter what the circumstances be. C for cancer is not a word that destroys you. C for Christ is what you have to look for, because that is what builds you, and that is what the Lord did for me. He took away the fear of death from me. I do not look at any of my circumstances now with the kind of apprehension that I had before. I go for innumerable tests even now, every 3 months. But every time I go, I know that the Lord has gone ahead. He is prepared for me what He's already ordained. The days of my life are in His hands. I do not have to worry about my today when the one who knows my tomorrow is holding me in His hands. And I do not think of any test with any apprehension. I just say, Lord, I thank you because you are love, because you're in charge and you're in control. And when you're in charge of my life, I have no worries. I have absolutely nothing to think about. Only give God the glory and honor. And even my life today is for Him, because I love Him. Not because of what He did, but because He changed me, because He touched me, because I know that He loves me and He's chosen me for a purpose. A plan that He made for me, a plan for a better future. A plan wherein He knows that I can be used, and I pray to God all the time, Lord, use me for your glorious kingdom. I don't know how many lives could be touched, but Lord, wherever you think that you want me to go and speak of what you have done, because this is all about you. It is not about me. It is not about my cancer. It is not about my treatment. It is about what Jesus has done. It is about what God has done. Praise be to God Almighty. Praise be to God.
I'm sure you were inspired by listening to Betty's testimony. One of the things that you can never miss out in what Betty was sharing was that in spite of her sickness, in spite of the fact that she had this cancer twice come into her body, she experientially understood the grace of God. She understood the joy of God. She understood the comfort in the midst of this. That she knew that there was an extra amazing power of God upholding her. And she found comfort. Others could not understand. And others could not even understand how that she could go through this with joy, with peace and comfort. And therefore, God does not promise us life without problem. But what He tells us is this: if you can accept this, one of the things that I liked about her is the fact that she said, Lord, let your will be done, not mine. I wish I could be saved from cancer. But Lord, if it is your will that I should go through this, I accept it. And I think one of the greatest things in our life is the ability to say, Lord, I wish I had no problem, but if you think this is something that I have to go through, give me the grace to accept it with joy, peace, comfort, and hope. I think the attitude towards our suffering is much more important than the actual suffering. All of us have to carry the cross. Somebody said it so beautifully. But when you begin to grumble and murmur, the cross becomes heavier and you still have to carry it. But if you can say, Lord, you're giving me this difficulty, but your grace is sufficient for me. I have your peace in the midst of this. I have your joy in spite of this. And then you have a cross. But God gives you grace to carry your cross. So, what we learn from Betty's testimony is this, that if you're saying, Lord, I don't know why this sickness came into my body, but Lord, I accept it. And I know that your grace is sufficient. I know your peace will strengthen me. I know there is a comfort, there is a mysterious presence of God in my life that sustains me. Even in the midst of my sickness, I think life will become much more wonderful for us. I like to read one quotation. When life falls apart, either you grow or you grow a tumor. When life goes apart, we have many problems that will come into our lives. But if you can say, Lord, this is going to build my character. Lord, I don't understand this suffering, but you're going to make me a beautiful person that I could be a greater comfort, encouragement for other people. Many things that God allows in your life is not necessary for us. But God allows us to build us so that we can be a blessing to other people. Somebody said this so beautifully. God has a vision for each of us. But to form us into that vision, so that we can fulfill that vision, He takes us to a valley. Unfortunately, many of us give up in that valley, in that suffering, in that furnace. But if you can just say, Lord, you're transforming me, you're giving me power and grace, and you're making me a beautiful vessel that I could be a blessing to others. Once we accept that, I think we have an amazing way of how God can take even the worst thing in our life and make it a great blessing. God bless you.